Imagine a king so powerful that not even death could claim him. Stabbed through the heart, poisoned at his own table, drowned in chains, yet every time he rose again. His people once cheered for him, but soon they whispered in terror, calling him not a ruler but a monster. This is the chilling tale of the cursed king who could never die. A man trapped between life and death, doomed to suffer for eternity. Part 1. The Rise of the King Long. Before the curse, long before whispers of immortality haunted the land, there was only a man, a prince named Aldric. He was not born cruel, nor was he born kind. He was born into hunger for power, a hunger that would shape not only his fate, but the fate of everyone who lived beneath his crown. Aldric's father, King Rowan, was a just man, though too gentle for the turbulent times. Their kingdom was surrounded by greedy neighbors, hungry for land and gold. Battles came often, and though King Rowan sought peace, war never stayed far from the gates. Aldric grew restless under his father's rule. To him, Rowan's compassion looked like weakness, and weakness was something Aldric despised. When Aldric finally ascended the throne, the people cheered at first. He was young, strong, and bold. He promised safety, wealth, and greatness. "No one will ever lay a hand upon our kingdom again," he declared during his coronation. His words struck fire in the hearts of his people. They believed him, and in the beginning, Aldric kept his word. He expanded the army, fortified the walls, and struck fear into neighboring realms. His victories were swift, his punishments merciless. Those who defied him vanished, sometimes quietly, sometimes with their heads displayed on city gates. The people grew safe under his reign, yes, but also silent. Safety came at the cost of freedom, and soon fear outweighed loyalty. Yet Aldric was never satisfied. He feared death more than he feared enemies, for he saw how frail his father had been in old age. He began seeking ways to live longer, to stay untouchable. He summoned healers, scholars, even alchemists to his court. Some whispered that he dabbled in dark rituals, that he visited hidden caves and spoke with things not meant to be seen. Then came the night of the witch. The kingdom had always told tales of her. An old woman with hair as black as crow's feathers, eyes like burning coals, and a voice that could turn blood cold. Many thought she was only a story used to frighten children. But Aldric, desperate and arrogant, hunted her out. It is said he found her in the deep woods where even birds dared not sing. "Grant me life everlasting," he demanded, his voice sharp with authority. The witch laughed, a laugh that echoed like bones cracking. She agreed, though not without a price. "You shall not know the peace of death," she whispered. "No blade will end you. No poison will claim you. No water shall drown you. You will walk this earth until it spits you out in disgust." Aldric smirked, thinking her words a blessing. He returned to his castle triumphant, certain he had secured his eternity. He did not yet know that her gift was no blessing. It was the curse that would unravel his kingdom and his soul. At first, nothing seemed different. Days passed, weeks slipped by, and King Aldric remained the same fierce ruler he had always been. He rode into battle with unmatched confidence, striking down his enemies with brutal efficiency. His soldiers marveled at his fearlessness. But Aldric's boldness wasn't courage, it was arrogance born from the witch's promise. He believed he could not die, and in time, fate tested him. It happened during a brutal siege. The neighboring kingdom of Elgrath had grown bold enough to challenge his armies. Aldric himself rode into the thick of the fight, sword gleaming crimson under the sun. Arrows rained down, and one struck him clean through the throat. His men cried out in horror, for surely their king had fallen. Aldric collapsed, choking on his own blood, his body twitching as life slipped away. But the next morning, when the sun rose over the battlefield, a dreadful sight greeted the soldiers. The king sat upright beside his horse, pale as a corpse, his wound still raw, but his eyes alive. Alive yet changed. The men whispered prayers and crossed themselves, terrified. Some dropped their weapons and fled. To them this was not a miracle, but an abomination. A man who should have been dead walking among them. Surely that was the work of demons. Aldric, however, reveled in it. He tore the arrow from his neck and stood tall, blood staining his armor, his voice ragged but triumphant. "You see? He shouted to the trembling soldiers, "No enemy can kill me. I am eternal. Follow me and you will never taste defeat." That day Elgrath fell, its walls broken, its people slaughtered. But the victory tasted strange, bitter even. The men who had once cheered their king now looked at him with unease. They whispered behind his back, avoided his gaze, and crossed themselves when his shadow passed over them. But the curse had only begun to reveal its cruelty. Not long after, Aldric's enemies conspired against him. In the grand hall of his own castle, a trusted servant slipped poison into his wine. The cup was raised, the toast declared, and Aldric drank deep. Moments later he convulsed on the floor, foaming at the mouth, his body stiffening. His court gasped in shock, some weeping, others silently relieved. At last, the tyrant was gone, or so they thought. 3 days later, when his coffin was prepared for burial, the lid cracked from inside. The attendants screamed and fled as Aldric climbed out, coughing and gasping, his skin pale, his veins dark with poison still inside him. His eyes were wide, burning with fury. He lived. Again, the kingdom shuddered with fear. To them, he was no longer a king. He was something else, something unnatural. A man who would not die, even when death itself tried to claim him. And from that moment, the people began to whisper his new name in hushed voices. The Cursed King. The curse revealed its true nature slowly, like a serpent tightening its coils. At first, Aldric had basked in his unnatural gift. He rode into battle without armor, daring his enemies to strike him. They did, and every time he rose again, stabbed through the chest, crushed beneath falling stone, even set aflame, yet each attempt to kill him ended the same. He lived. But though his body rose, it did not heal as it once had. Scars multiplied across his flesh. His skin bore the permanent marks of arrows, blades, and burns. His eyes sank deeper, ringed with shadows. He was not a god. He was a corpse that refused to stay buried. His people noticed. At first they had whispered that their king was chosen by the heavens. But when the smell of rot began to cling to him, when his laughter sounded less human and more like a hollow echo, reverence turned to horror. Mothers pulled their children from the streets when he passed. Priests began to call him unnatural, a blight upon the kingdom. The first rebellion came not from enemies abroad, but from within his castle walls. One of his generals, a man he had trusted since boyhood, led the charge. They stormed the king's chambers at night, swords flashing. Aldric fought like a beast, but this time they overwhelmed him. His own general drove a blade deep into his heart. The king collapsed, blood pooling beneath him. His men, breathless and shaking, stood over his body. For the first time, hope sparked in their eyes. But at dawn, the hope died. The king's body twitched. His hand clawed the stone floor. His chest rose with a wet gasp, and his eyes opened, black veins spiderwebbing across his skin. He sat up, coughing blood, and looked at the men who had betrayed him. They screamed. That day the king did not just execute traitors. He made an example. The general was flayed alive and hung from the castle walls. Others were drowned, burned, broken on the wheel, yet Aldric made them watch as he declared, "Do you see? Even when betrayed I rise. Death will never claim me." But behind his fury was something else. Fear. For though Aldric could not die, he felt every wound, every cut, every flame, every crushing blow. Pain was now his constant companion. He did not pass into death's embrace. He endured, always. And as his people whispered in dread, one truth became clear. Their king was no longer a man of flesh and soul. He was a cursed shell, cursed to live on, cursed to suffer forever. The witch's words had come true. The years rolled on, yet Aldric remained. His body bore the marks of countless deaths, but he never aged, never passed beyond the veil. His scars grew thicker, his voice raspier, and his eyes colder. To his people, their king no longer looked human. He looked like a revenant, half alive, half corpse. The kingdom changed with him. Where once the streets were filled with laughter and song, silence now reigned. Merchants packed their carts and fled to distant lands. Priests declared the king cursed by the gods. Farmers abandoned their fields, believing the soil itself rejected life under his rule. Famine crept in like a shadow, and still Aldric clung to his throne. Whispers of rebellion grew louder. "He cannot die," the people muttered, "but perhaps the kingdom can." Villagers stopped sending taxes. Soldiers deserted their posts. Even the nobles, who once fattened themselves on his power, began plotting in secret. Aldric knew. He always knew. His paranoia became a second curse. He no longer trusted his council, his guards, or even the servants who brought him food. He dined alone, slept with one eye open, and lashed out at shadows. The witch's words rang in his mind, mocking him. "You will walk this earth until it spits you out in disgust." And the earth was indeed beginning to spit him out. One winter night the people rose against him. A mob of thousands stormed the castle gates, carrying torches, pitchforks, and stolen swords. Their voices thundered in unison, "Monster! Demon, end this curse!" The guards who once would have died for their king now opened the gates. They too had grown weary of serving a ruler who could not die, but could not live either. The mob dragged Aldric from his throne. They chained him, beat him, and dragged him through the streets. He did not fight. Perhaps deep within, a small part of him hoped that this time death might take him. They stoned him, burned him, and finally bound him with iron weights and cast him into the river. For 3 days, the waters churned, and the river ran black with his blood. The people prayed, begged, and waited for silence. But on the 4th day the river broke open, and Aldric crawled onto the banks, his flesh pale and waterlogged, his eyes glowing like embers in the dark. He coughed, retched, and screamed, a sound not of triumph, but of torment. The people fled in terror. Realizing the truth they had always feared, they could not kill their king, and so the kingdom began to crumble. One by one, villages emptied, the castle fell into ruin, and the land itself turned barren. The throne remained, but its ruler was no longer a king. He was a cursed figure, feared by all, abandoned by gods and men alike. Years bled into decades. Decades turned to centuries. Yet King Aldric still walked the earth. His kingdom, once rich and thriving, was nothing more than ruins swallowed by weeds and silence. The great castle halls stood hollow, their banners rotted, their stones crumbling. The marketplace where children once laughed now lay buried in dust. Only the wind remained to answer him. Aldric, however, endured. He wore no crown now, only tattered robes that clung to his scarred body. His face was a patchwork of old wounds, his flesh pale and tight over bone. His voice had become a whisper, hollow and cracked. He no longer resembled a king, nor even a man. He was a shadow of what he once had been, yet he lived. Always he lived. He tried everything to end it. He cast himself from cliffs, only to awaken broken and gasping at the bottom. He drank poison until his veins ran black, only to wake days later in agony. He walked into fires, begged beasts to tear him apart, even thrust swords into his own chest. But nothing freed him. Death mocked him, always near, but never granting release. As the centuries passed, the world around him forgot his name. New kingdoms rose and fell. New kings and queens sat on thrones, their bones buried with honor when their time came. Songs and legends were sung of warriors, heroes, and martyrs. But Aldric's tale was whispered only as a warning, a story told to frighten children. "Beware the cursed king," the villagers said, huddled by firelight. "The king who would not die still wanders the earth, searching for peace he can never find." And sometimes travelers swore they saw him. A tall, gaunt figure wandering roads at night, eyes burning faintly in the darkness. His steps were slow, his face hidden beneath a hood. He spoke to no one. He carried no weapon. But those who saw him claimed that the air grew heavy, that silence followed in his wake, and that their dreams were haunted for nights afterward. In the deepest hours of his solitude, Aldric himself began to weep, not for power, nor for glory, but for the death he had once feared. He would have given his throne, his riches, even his soul, just to close his eyes and never wake again. But the witch's curse was unbroken, and so he walked still, a king with no kingdom, a ruler with no subjects, cursed to wander forever, not remembered with honor, not feared with respect, but pitied as a man who asked for life eternal and received instead the cruelest fate imaginable, a deathless existence, empty and endless, the cursed king who couldn't die. And so, the king who once sought to live forever became a prisoner of his own wish. His throne turned to dust. His name faded from history, yet still he walks, scarred, broken, and forgotten. No army can defeat him, no blade can end him, no prayer can save him. The curse is his crown, and eternity his punishment. Remember this tale of the king who could not die, for sometimes the greatest tragedy is not death itself, but the endless burden of living without end.